So we are live now.
Thank you, Shubham. Hello and good evening, everybody over here. Welcome, the academicians, scholars, dear students, and most importantly, our distinguished speaker, Dr. Saba Mahmood Bashir. And as we are already aware that we are gathered here on this virtual platform for the second talk of the lecture series, An Evening with an Expert, which is organized by the Department of English, Gokhale Memorial Girls College. Thus, without further ado, I would request Ms. Shinjini Ghosh to introduce our speaker. Over to you, Shinjini.
Thank you, Durvadi. It is indeed a great pleasure to introduce Dr. Saba Mahmood Bashir. Dr. Bashir is currently the Assistant Professor of Department of English, Jamia Millia Islamia University. She is also the Associate Editor of the Women's Link Journal. Her research interests include Indian writing in English, Indian literatures in English translation, translation and translation studies, film, and Urdu poetry. Uh, Dr. Bashir is involved into teaching various courses, among which some of are Indian literature in translation, literatures of India, Dalit literature, PG diploma in translation, diploma in translation, certificate in translation proficiency, British poetry, popular literature and culture, post-colonial literature, review writing, language and communication skills, Indian writings in English, filming fiction, and creative writing. Dr. Bashir also has various publications to her credit. I'd love to read out a few of them. Uh, Woman of Prey, she's published a book called Woman of Prey, a translation of Sadat Hassan Manto's Shikari Aurate, which was published by Speaking Tiger, October 2019. Uh, Gulzar's Andhi is yet another publication of Dr. Bashir. That is an analytical book on the film by the same name, which is published by HarperCollins India. Tehreer Munshi Premchand ki Godan Nirmala and Other Stories, screenplays by Gulzar, a work of translation from Hindustani into English, which is published by Roli Books. She has also had I Swallowed the Moon. This is basically her PhD thesis, which has been published by HarperCollins India publishers. Memory Past is another collection of poems which has been brought out by Writers Workshop. This is yet another publication of Dr. Bashir. Dr. Bashir has also contributed innumerable chapters in different books, some of which are Urban Spaces in Modern India, Dalit Literature and Historiography. Another publication called Biography of Sir Syed Ahmed Khan for young adults is yet to be published, and that is coming out by Kitab Publications by the end of this month, 2022. Dr. Bashir has been recognized and has been awarded by several awards, some of which are the Ruel International Award for Best Book on Cinema for Andhi, Insights into the Film. She's also been awarded the Bhagbari Handu Gold Medal for MA English Literature. Shashi Lata Veerabhadra Jha Gold Medal for MA English Literature has also been awarded to her. Dr. Bashir is currently the member of the coordination committee for the upcoming NAC visit. She is also the teacher placement coordinator of the Department of English for MA. She is the in charge of the departmental website. She is responsible for curriculum development for PG diploma in translation proficiency. She's also responsible for curriculum development for certificate in digital humanities. She's the convener of the committee to update and rework the syllabi for all courses which are run in the Department of English. And she's also a part of the weed out committee for obsolete library books and journals. Over to you, madam.
Thank you so much. It was rather embarrassing. You were talking about the different books and the chapters, and thank you. It's very kind, and it's an honor to be able to speak on this issue today. Uh, Translation is something that's very close to me, and thank you for the. I'm really humbled at it, the very elaborate introduction. And thank you so much, Shubham, and the college, the Gokhale College. I mean, it's really an honor to be able to speak with the students right now. Uh, the topic for today's session is untranslatability in translation, challenges and possible impossible solutions. So we are talking about what exactly is translation, and what, and when we say translation, what exactly is translation? What is a translator? How does a translator come around to it? We'll be briefly touching upon the process of translation and the issue of equivalence, the issue of untranslatability, and how does a translator actually uh, deals with it. There's a very small PPT that I have made so that when we talk about it, when we interact, so there are a few things which are there which will help. And this is a definition which I always use even in classes. We have a couple of courses on translation which are going on in Jamia. We have a diploma and a certificate and a PG diploma in translation proficiency. So it's the idea is how it's a hands-on experience on how to be able to translate, and this is a very apt a definition of what exactly a translation is, and it's from the translator's note of Divine Comedy. And I'll just read out this little thing. When the violin repeats what the piano has just played, it cannot make the same sounds, and it can only approximate the same chords. It can, however, make recognizably the same music, the same air, and it can do so only when it is faithful to the self-logic of the violin as it is to the self-logic of the piano. So when we are translating, so we know there is something which will be left out. There will be something which will be different. But at the end of the day, the essence of a good translation, the essence of translation per se, is how we are able to capture some interesting thing, not only the content, but also the cultural nuances of the source language. And as a translator, we can take it to the target language. So every time we keep on talking about it, we talk about what exactly is the process of translation. And it's very simply put. You can say that to each to its own kind of a thing. But there is one process which all translators follow, and which also happens to be the role of the translator. Yeah. So the role of the translator is actually three-layered. So first of all, the translator will become a reader, and then a writer, and finally an editor. So when I say this, this is kind of overlapping with the process of translation also. So when you are translating something, it is you have to get into the skin of the author. You really, as a translator, we cannot communicate some of our own ideas. We have to be very true to the author. We have to be very true to the text. So it is, we get into the skin of the author to be able to understand what exactly the author is trying to communicate. And for that, we become a reader first. And if you notice that, as I put in the PowerPoint also, so when you are a reader, the first and foremost thing is the analysis. You try and understand what exactly is the intention of the author, and that is the challenge, to be able to communicate not only in terms of the language and the content, but also in terms of being able to pick up all the cultural nuances from the source language and take it to the target language. A very interesting exercise is that we as translators do. So every time we read something, it is it creates a visual image for us. And by the end of it, when you finish translation and you read your translated piece, somehow it should come up as in with the same visual image which comes up, which was there in the source language. If you are managing, if you are able to conquer the same visual image that was there in the source language, and you're able to bring it in the target language in the piece of translation, it means that fairly one has done a fairly good job. So the first role is of the reader. And when I say reader, then you have to get into the skin of the author, you have to feel the text. you also mean that you have to find the undercurrents, the underlying tones in that piece. Is that humor? Is that sarcasm? So sometimes when you see that there is a paper, say an academic paper with jargons, it's actually a little easier to translate than a very simplistic text which has sarcasm in it or has very subtle humor in it, because every language has its own humor, own sarcasm, has its own nuances. So to be able to transfer it from one language into the other to manage that level of equivalence is the challenge. So as a reader, the translator would grapple with all of these. And then the second role is that the translator becomes the writer. So one has to see that there is the communicative level. I hope that the translator would keep on thinking that I hope that I've preserved all the information. But it is not only the mundane information that has to be transferred from the source into the target, it is the entire essence, the communication. So the translator, the second role or the second process is that the translator becomes a writer. And the final, which is invariably a rather complicated one, that the translator has to sit back and read it that it looks like a piece in itself. One has to see the syntax and the structure of the translated piece. As a practical difficulty or a practical error that all translators come across, because when we are translating, you keep on writing and you keep on going on with it, we tend to miss out how the syntax, the tone of each language is different. So one has to kind of, post it again, one has to read it again to look at the syntax and the structure of the target language and see how that goes. Before I touch upon these key issues in translation, it's very commonly I get to hear from people, it's very difficult to translate the Indian languages into English, but that is not the case. Any translation of any language into another language will be a difficult task. So, one of the favorite examples that I keep on giving to the students also, and say something like, a simple sentence, say it's an English story, and we think, translating English into one of our own languages, Hindi, Urdu, Bangla, it should be an easier cup of tea. But say, I mean, if I give you an example, say the sentence is like, this is a short story which is based around Halloween, and the story starts with a simple sentence: the pumpkin was carved. So now we need to be very well aware of the cultural reference to what we are saying. And it's say that the title of the story is Halloween, so we know it surrounds around the festival of Halloween. And the simple sentence, the pumpkin was carved. So now when we get down to translate it, either in, that's what I'm saying, any language, Hindi, Urdu, Bangla. So the word carved, because whatever translated word that keeps on coming in your mind would not be actually fitting with the carving of the pumpkin. You can think of, I mean, I don't know if there are some people. It will be nice if you start. I will be posing these kind of interactive questions. So if you have responses, please keep on putting it in the chat box, and then we can have a two-way discussion about it also. Then I can keep on responding to it also. There will be questions at the end of the session, of course, but even in the middle of the lecture, if you come up with something like this, how would you translate the sentence, the pumpkin was carved? Do feel free to share it. In the meantime, I'll continue with the talk. We will be discussing key issues in translation. So largely, what we come across is what we see is these are the four issues that all translators come across. Every language has its own dialect, and sometimes the idialects of the character that we talking about, which is a part of it. So to be able to transfer, I mean, this is what the topic is, this idea of possible and impossible translations, this idea of equivalence, this issue of untranslatability. So you see, so what is, how does a translator come across to it? How does a translator deal with this challenge? And I have put out certain examples which we'll throw light on. And the next is the tone of the text. Especially in a journalistic piece, sometimes it looks like it's just a piece of news. But if you look at the editorials, the op-eds, there is an undercurrent which the author, which the writer is trying to communicate. And again, to touch what I had discussed earlier, how humor and sarcasm is difficult to translate. So one has to feel the tone of the text of the author, and to be able to successfully, to whatever level one brings it. Then the syntax of the target language, and finally, which comes out as one of the most difficult things, are the idiomatic references. Every language has its own idiomatic usage, how they pick on certain idioms and mold it and they use it. For example, the last book that I translated was Manto's Shikari Orte. Uh, there was a very interesting story where there was a communication between a husband and wife, and it was a very witty and a humorous short story where the husband comes back from work and he's very hungry and he tells the wife, मेरे पेट में चूहे कूद रहे हैं. So, I mean, as a translator, of course, you'll not do a literal translation. So you might turn around and translate it something like, I'm famished, or, I'm very hungry, or something like that. But the difficult part came because the wife responds, फिर आप वही चूहे पकड़ के खा लीजिए. So now, if in the first half of the translation, if you translate it as something as, I'm famished, give me food, and then why would the wife say, can you eat? I mean, catch hold of the mice or eat it or whatever. So these are the challenges. And I remember when I was translating this particular story, and these were three little or four little sentences, one little paragraph, you keep on mulling over it. So I mean, translation might look like it's a very interesting, it's a lot of fun, but it's a lot of mulling over something and keep on going back to it. And to go back to our earlier slide about being an editor, a translator becomes a writer and an editor. So you keep on revising your own translation. So I have some of the very interesting titles. These are some short stories that I have translated. And there's one more thing over here I'd like to add over here. When you are translating as a translator, one has to be a very important prerequisite for all translators is that one has to be very, very comfortable. It's not important that you only have a knowledge or you can read the language. One has to be very comfortable in both the languages, with the source language as well as the target language, because there are certain nuances which only reading a language would not, I mean, you would not be able to reach to that nuance. Again, to give you an example, for example, I mean, there's someone who can read the Urdu very well, and there is that person is translating a short story, and it's a wedding scenario and something like that, and the Urdu sentence goes as शादी का घर था मामा भात लेके आए. So now, say, I mean, in Bengal or in Odisha, and bhat is equivalent to rice. But in a UP household, especially in a wedding, bhat is got nothing to do with rice. It is the gift that the mama brings for the niece in a wedding. In UP, both in Hindus and Muslims. So this is bhat. So that's why I'm saying one has to be not only very familiar with both the languages, but also about all the cultural connotations. One has to, be very well aware of everything. So these are a couple of the titles of short stories which I have done over the last few years. So there is this, and I just wanted to, if these sentences come in the middle of a lesson, in the middle of a text, One can paraphrase it, one can extend it, footnote it, but something as just a title of a short story, it gets very difficult because, I mean, for a title, you wouldn't like to develop into something else. You wouldn't be explaining it further. Like, for instance, this first example that I have kept is Meerut Ki Penchi. So now this is the short story about a woman, Parvati. It's actually a sketch, a biographical sketch, and not a short story, where this woman is very witty and she belongs to Meerut. So it's got nothing to do with the scissors, but we know that Meerut is a place which is famous for scissors, and there is also an idiomatic reference in Urdu na कि उसकी ज़बान कैंची की तरह चलती है. So we know. So what the author, what Mando has put two and two together is like he's calling Paro Devi as Meerut the Kainji. So and again. I'm not giving the translations here, so if there are any, or if there's anyone who would like to respond to it and put it in the chat box or something, we can discuss it. Now, the other short story title that I have pulled out is Hajamat is again in Urdu. Hajamat has a double meaning. Number one is just the shave or the haircut or something. It's actually the shave, but another idiomatic reference, and again, I mean, these are the three authors that I have translated the maximum, and I found that Manto is one who really who would really dip his fingers into idiomatic references. And hajamat is again in Urdu, it's like unki hajamat bani hai, or like there's a lot of leg pulling. So it has a reference to that, and this is a short story which is a very interesting conversation between a husband and wife. This story is very witty. It just has dialogues between a husband and wife, where the wife is pestering the husband to go and get a haircut, but no, hajamat bana rahi hai. So even you can see that it's this humor, this double-edged word, and it's got nothing to do with the physical haircut actually, but how the wife is actually pulling her husband's leg all the time. So again, that's a challenge. How do you translate this? Then there are complicated stories which are like Rehmat Khudawandi ke Phool, where how you break it up, like you're doing into a syntax of a sentence, and then you try and translate it, and then try and bring it together. And again, these are just titles, and if you imagine the titles are so complicated, how fascinatingly complicated would the entire stories be? Then these are three short stories by Gulzar. Dury is again, it's a kind of an abstract thing. It's not the doorstep. It is not the entrance to the house. It is more of an abstract thing. I mean, the closest that I could think of was threshold, but it's rather than a physical entity. It's more abstract in nature. Then Atania, again, Atania seems very simple to translate, but the nuance that it brings forward is interesting. And Vidai. Now, Vidai is again, a very cultural thing, and there are so many things associated with it. And with this title of the short story, I'll connect with the short stories of Premchand, because even in the Premchand short stories, you have a lot of the cultural, the regional, the religion. There is so much involved in it. For example, Panch Parmeshwar. So we know the panches, we know what a panchayat is and how we treat them as God. So, but in an Indian context, calling the panch Parmeshwar is very easy, and that's what we've been reading about it. But again, the issue comes in finding an equivalence in the target language. Who's Kirat? Again, it's whatever title you can think of. So if people can think of these titles, please put it on the chat box. We'll take it up. Then we have Budi Kaki, and again, Kaki is even if you retain the word Kaki to retain the flavor, but again, the elderly Kaki, the old Kaki, that nuance does not come. What is reflected in Budi Kaki. And to make matters worse, we have Thakur ka Kuan. And again, when we say Thakur ka Kuan and you read the story, it's all about the caste politics. It's about how one section of the society cannot go and take water from a particular well. So I mean, you would end up translating it as the Thakur's well, but uh, the plethora of feelings that the Thakur ka Kuan throws up, and again, for an English audience, how does one actually go ahead and you try and explain what exactly this? I mean, why this Thakur, and why there are different wells for different sections of a society. Then you have Hajj Akbar, which is it's just completely non-self-explanatory, and one of my favorite titles when it comes to translate or to discuss translation is Ghar Jamai. Uh, this is a topic that you keep on. I mean, it's practically untranslatable, and then either you retain Ghar Jamai as it is, and that's something for the Premchand short stories. I was trying to do that. I tried to retain the Hindi, the Hindustani titles. So I'm just trying to showcase, I mean, the difficulties in just some titles, and then we'll just go further ahead and see the different key issues that we had talked about in the last slide. Humor. I don't know how clear it is for you to be able to read it. I'll read out this little portion on humor. So I'll read it out so that you can see it. So this is another short story, and this is Hajamat, what I was just talking about. I'll just open a bigger version, and just give me a second, and I'll read this portion because it looks very tiny in your yeah. So, as I was telling you, this is a conversation between the husband and wife, and it's a very witty story. And this is the opening section of the short story. So it's the husband that's the husband and wife, and it's the first sentence is by the wife. मेरी तो आपने जिंदगी हराम कर रखी है, खुदा करे मैं मर जाऊं, अपने मरने की दुआ क्यों मांगती हो, मैं मर जाऊं तो सारा किस्सा पाक हो जाएगा, कहो तो अभी खुदकुशी करने के लिए तैयार हूँ, यहाँ पास ही अफीम का ठेका है, एक तोला अफीम काफी होगी, जाओ सोचते क्या हो, जाता हूँ, तुम उठो और मुझे मालूम नहीं एक तोला अफीम कितने में आती है, तुम मुझे अंदाजन 10 रुपए दे दो। 10 रुपए? हाँ भाई, अपनी जान गंवानी है, 10 रुपए ज्यादा तो नहीं, मैं नहीं दे सकती, जरूर आपको अफीम खा के मरना है। So this is, just the beginning of the little story, and obviously we all know that he's not going to, you know, to go and buy a film or give up his life or something. It's just a very funny and a witty conversation. You are ruining my life, and I just read out the English translation. What I tried to do. I mean, I don't know what kind of justice was I could manage, but still. You've made my life miserable. May God take me and deliver me from this hell. Why are you praying for your head? Sorry. Why are you praying for your death? All of this will end if I die. I'm ready to kill myself if you say so. There is an opium den right here. One tola would be enough. Go then. What are you waiting for? I'm going. Get up. Give me. I don't know how much a tola of opium would cost. Maybe 10 rupees. Give me 10. 10 rupees? Well, yes, after all, I'm giving up my life. 10 rupees isn't a lot. I can't. Does it have to be opium? So the discussion goes on. The wife says, why do you want to kill yourself with opium? So, this is uh, the aspect that we're talking about, how to be able to bring in the tone of the source language into the target language. And the other topic that you were touching upon was the idiomatic references. I had given that example about the पेट में चूहे कूद रहे हैं. So what happens is, as I was saying, every language has its own idioms, the way people use idioms. So I'll read out again. It looks very tiny here on the screen. So I'll just read out. This is from the title story of Manto, Shikari Orte, and these are three little things. And the story is, there are two men who are going, and then there's this woman in a brown naqab, and she's wearing a brown burqa, and then she's and I'll just read it out, and then we'll discuss it. And the title of the story is Shikari Orte. हम कॉफी हाउस पहुंचे तो औरत को टांग I'm sorry, हम कॉफी हाउस पहुंचे तो औरत का टांगा भी वहीं रुक गया। मेरे दोस्त ने अंदर जाकर 10 रुपए का बंदोबस्त किया और बाहर निकला। वो औरत नस्वारी बुरखे में जाने किसकी मुंतजिर थी। हम वापस घर जाने लगे तो रास्ते में खरबूजों का ढेर नजर आए। हम दोनों तांगे से उतरकर खरबूजे परखने लगे। हम फैसला किया कि अच्छे नहीं निकलेंगे, क्योंकि उनकी शक्ल सूरत बड़ी बेढंगी थी। जब उठे तो क्या देखते हैं कि वो नस्वारी बुरखा तांगे में बैठा खरबूजे देख रहा है। मैंने अपने दोस्त से कहा, खरबूजा खरबूजे को देखकर रंग पकड़ता है, आपने अभी तक ये नस्वारी रंग नहीं पकड़ा। So here we see, so there is a context not only of the idiom खरबूजे को देखकर खरबूजा रंग बदलता है, but how the author Mando tries and brings it, and he tries to say, because this woman is there in a brown naqab, a brown burqa, and so he's talking about आपने भूरा रंग नहीं पकड़ा. I'll not read out this translation. I just want to obviously one has to do it, so you try and negotiate and navigate your way through it, and you come up with the most feasible um, challenge and the most feasible possible or impossible solution. But going on to the next slide, and with with poetry it becomes, it becomes a little more challenging, because apart from the various things that one has to capture, the search for equivalence, this negotiating, untranslatability, poetry has some rhythm. So now the issue comes when you try and find that rhyme and rhythm and some kind of semblance in the target language. What is rhyming in the source language will not be rhyming in the target language. So not even that rhyme, but not even I'm not even talking about trying to maintain the meter. Uh, Even to manage the rhythm, it gets very challenging. So this is a little piece from this poetry by Gulzar Sab. My doctoral work, my PhD, was on Gulzar Sab's poetry, which was his a kind of a comparison of his film and non-film poetry. So obviously there was a lot of whatever poetry that I picked up for analysis was translated. So I'm just reading this couplet. एक सबब मरने का, एक तलब जीने की, चांद पुखराज का, रात पश्मीने की. So it's a beautiful couplet, and when then I mean every time you read the translation, you feel that you've not done justice, but this is the closest that I could get at. The translation is also here. A reason to die, a craving to live, a topaz moon, a warm, cozy night. So, of course, we know what Pashmina stands for, and then again bringing it, and again it's poetry, and then had it been a story, we might have been able to elaborate it a little more, but in a piece of poem, I mean, it's just a couplet, and so one has to be very crisp, one has to make sure, and this is what we're talking about, the level of untranslatability, but as a translator, you don't trust your hands and, sit back, this can't be done. You might not get as close as the original, as what the author intended to say, but as the translator, it is your responsibility, it's your duty to come closest to what one should or one can. And there's the first example was from a non-film poetry, and this is film poetry. This is a song from Mosam, and it's a song that we're all very familiar with. And the opening couplet is taken from Ghalib, which Gulzar Sab had built it on. So I'll just read the two, three lines over here, and then just look at the words, how we deal with it. दिल ढूंढता है फिर वही फुर्सत के रास्ते, बैठे रहें तसव्वुरे जाना किए हुए, जाड़ों की नर्म धूप पर आंगन में लेट कर आंखों पे खींच कर तेरे आंचल की साए को औंधे पड़े रहें कभी करवट लिए हुए. So when you look at this beautiful, beautiful poem, so you try and wonder, apart from the very obvious, tasavvur jana kiye hue, apart from the very obvious, how do you translate? But things like as simple as anchal or ondhe and karvat, because ondhe is like you're lying down with your face on the ground, so that's ondhe. But face down or whatever does not sound poetic at all. And even karvat, so it's like sideways or something. So if it's a piece of poetry, I mean, how do you translate onthe and karvat in a piece of poetry? And that's the challenge that one keeps on dealing with. So so it's the rhythm that one has to negotiate, the find the search of equivalence, and the aim is to keep on looking for the possible and impossible solutions to translation. So I'll end it over here. I have some of the other. I pulled out a couple of other poetry of Gulzar Sab also, but I'd like to see if there are a couple of questions. Let's take that first, and then we'll see if you want to look at more translation. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for your insightful lecture. There are some comments in the YouTube chat box. I hope I'm audible to you.
You are. Thank you. I mean,
Yes,
yes.
yes. So there is a comment by, I'm just putting the comments on stream so that you can see them as well. There is a comment by Amrita Kalia. It's regarding divine judges. And she was commenting while you were explaining some of your. And after this, there is another comment by the residential son-in-law,
Yeah, I think she was
Amrita.
trying to translate the titles.
Yes, yes. And there is a question by Megha Madan. I remember, oh, sorry, not a question, but a comment. I remember we translated Gorjama in translation class. Yes. So there is another question by Muhammad Rian. How will we say Dhobi ka kutta, ghar ka na ghatka?
हाँ, ना घर का ना घाट का.
Yes, Muhammad Rian. So
Yeah.
there is a question,
See, I mean,
not a question.
Rehan, we'll have to see the context. It can be like neither here or neither there. And every time it comes about, idiomatic references, the idea is to find an equivalent in the target language. If you are able to get an equivalent translation in the target language, nothing like it. you know, then I mean it kind of solves it completely. But if you do not, for example, Asman Zagira Khajur Petka. So although I mean you're not doing a literal translation, but you have an English equivalent which is from the fire into the frying pan. So you use that. But for example, right now I can't think of Dhobi ka kutta na ghar ka na ghat ka. So uh, neither here nor there kind of a thing. He didn't belong to neither here or nor there. So you do that. I mean, you translate the meaning, and it would be best if you can find an equivalent. For example, Nach na jane angan tera. So this is something, but you will find an equivalent in English. You might think of something, and you might get, what is that? Uh, the carpenter who fights with the tools. I can't get the exact idiom at the moment, but you will get an equivalent idiom at that moment. So if you can get it, Rian, that's perfect. If not, then you translate the essence and the meaning, because then you do not use either the dhobi or the kutta. So, and thank you. That was good question, Rehan. And even going back to what Amrita was trying to translate for Ghar Jamai, and Megha says that she's translated that story. I don't know, Megha, how did you give the title to the story? But Amrita, I don't know if a residential son-in-law would make sense because there is so much of comes in when you say Ghar Jamai. There's so much of meaning and a cultural context, and so much is connoted and denoted through it. But yeah, that's the challenge.
Thank you, ma'am. And there is another question by Professor Shudipto Mondol, and he has greatly appreciated your talk. That was a very insightful talk, Dr. Bashir. Thank you. My question stems from your argument as to how different cultural nuances, including dialects, influence translation, and translatability. So that's his question.
Yeah.
How
Uh,
different cultural nuances, including dialects, influence translation and translatability.
it influences a lot, sir. And thank you for the appreciation, and thank you for asking me to come and speak on something that I'm very fond of. To give an example, one of these stories that I was even I referred to in the talk, Athamia. It's a story about three men who meet in Bombay, and they are talking in Hindustani and three different dialects. So one is from UP, so obviously the person who's from UP is speaking a different kind of Hindustani. The other person is from Tamil Nadu, and the third person is from Bombay. So when we translate, so in Hindustani, in Hindi and Urdu, when we read this short story, we know the difference between this young chap from Faizabad and the kind of Urdu that he's speaking, or the Bombaya Hindi that is coming around, or the gentleman from Tamil Nadu. Obviously, his Hindi is very different, and he's broken, fragmented sentences. Now, when we translate the story, this is Atania. So now, when we translate the story into English, to bring in these three kind of dialects and idiolects from Hindustani into English is a challenge. And I'm sure as translators, we also feel that we do miss out on certain cultural nuances, but that is the challenge that we, try and find out the best negotiable commonality, the common thing that is there. Uh, can I have the question again? Have I missed out
Yes,
something?
yes, ma'am. This is a question from Professor Durba Mukherjee. My question stems from your argument as to how different cultural nuances, including dialects, influence translation and
Yeah,
translatability.
translatability. Yeah. Yes, I think yes. So I think I did touch upon your question. So these cultural nuances, they have to be, and there are. I mean, I've got so many examples from what I've been doing, and uh, it is always there. For example, there's another story that I translated. Where there's this man and he is in the habit of every time he talks, so he kind of does a thump on his thighs. Every time he would talk, he would put his hand on his thighs like that. So his friends had named him Machar Khan because it looked like as if he was killing mosquitoes on his thighs. So uh, these cultural nuances are too much. I mean, as Indians, we can understand, why is someone being called Machar Khan, or what is the thing. But when you bring it into English, you definitely feel that you're missing out on something. And as translators, you try and come to the most closest to whatever equivalent and the semblance that you can bring in.
Yes, and ma'am, there is a second part to her question. I'm curious as to the changes that different periods like colonial Indian period, the 20th century India, even the present 21st century India have brought about in the field of literary translation, or have they? So, how the temporal changes are happening over
Yeah,
time?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, thank you for such a fantastic question. Like everything else, translation is also, everything is evolving. There is a transition in everything. And if you look at the text which was translated 40 and 50 years ago, the translators were dealing with it in a very different way vis-a-vis to the translators who are dealing in 2022. To give you an example, by now more and more, I'm giving you example from how Indian the vernacular is being translated into English. So now more and more of our words which have already found place in the dictionaries are being accepted. If we pick up a translation, say the Premchand that was translated in 1960 is very different from the Premchand that is translated in 2020. Something like words like ghee or puri. Uh, Earlier translations, say 50 years ago, they were being translated as clarified butter, or the Indian bread, the deep fried Indian bread. The translators do not use that, do not do that in this century, in this age and date. We would be translating, we would retain ghee as ghee, we would not translate it as clarified butter. And I'm not saying what was being done was wrong at that time. Everything is a matter of, everything evolves, there is a transition in everything. And we as translators are also learning and with the change of not only technology, but with the language evolving, everything is changing. So, and that is another reason which also brings us to what we discussed as the need for retranslation of the same text. As language keeps on evolving, what was translated 40 years ago in today's generation will not relate it in that fashion. So it has to be brought forth in today's language, the language that you and I are speaking. You know something as insignificant as the dark glasses, as goggles or sunglasses or shades. I mean, language is evolving. So you know how things were being translated, and as translators, uh, in fact, many publishing houses have stopped even using a glossary now. They say that you retain the Indian words because the audience is also intelligent enough, and if they are unable to find something, they'll as it is they'll look it up. So most of the publishing houses, the recent translated works, we don't even have a glossary as compared to the books which were being translated 20 years ago. We had a long list of we were explaining what is a nawab or what is a sari, what is a pallu. No, nothing. It's accepted, and we have accepted the fact that our readers are also very intelligent, and by now they know what they're reading.
Thank you, ma'am. There is a rejoinder from Amrita. Very true. And thereafter, she has written, we can't just transfer the nuance associated with Ghorjama in English.
Absolutely, I completely agree with her. So so that is the fun of translating the titles and the short story. Thank you,
Yes.
Amrita. Yes.
And Muhammad Rihan has thanked you for your comment. And Megha Madan, nuances are majorly what gives context and understanding to the text, and it enriches its intended meanings. There is a
Absolutely.
rejoinder from Megha as well.
Absolutely, I
And
completely agree, and I'm glad that these people are thinking like that. Fantastic. Yeah.
there is a thank you note from our faculty member, Professor Durba Mukherjee as well. Thank you, Dr. Bashir.
Thank you, Dr.
And
Durga Mukherjee.
there is a comment from Amrita again about the English title for Hajmat. What would be the appropriate considering the connotative meaning associated with this word?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Amrita. Thankfully, the short story it's a very humorous short story. You will get the text on it's easily available on the internet. I think it's there on the Recta website. Read this short story. It's very interesting. It's a humorous conversation between a husband and wife. And the wife keeps on telling the husband, जाइए आप हजामत बनवा लीजिए. And आप तो मेरी हजामत बनवा रहे हैं. The husband would keep on saying that. Thankfully, they're actually talking about a haircut also. So by the end of it, he goes to a salon and to get his haircut done. So when I translated this finally after, and I mean actually the little translation is shave, but then since they were talking about the haircut, so I translated it as haircut only. I don't know if that was the right approach or not, but after mulling over it for days, I translate it as hajama, as haircut, and of course did try to bring in all the nuances, that humor and wit which was there in the story. But about the other short stories, that Premchand short stories, and this was a collection of, this came out in 2016, about 5 6 years back. So this was a collection of 10 short stories or 12 short stories by Premchand. So over there I had a word, and these are the short stories, Poos Ki Raat and Thakur Ka Kuan and Buri Kaki and Swamini. So I had a word with the publisher and asked them, said, yeah, at the index as well as the title, let's retain the Hindustani name. And then we decided not to translate these titles at all. I don't know if it's the right decision, and thankfully the publisher was on board with it, because Thakur Ka Kuan or Buri Kaki, it was losing out on all the sense, Panch Parmeshwar. So, yes, so these were the stories.
There is a comment by Megha. Transition itself becomes a reason of retranslations. Wonderfully put, ma'am. So
Thank you,
please
Megha.
render to your answer.
Thank you, and very well put, Megha.
Yes, and I'm glad that there are so many questions that are coming up in the YouTube. And Amrita has again thanked you for your comment, and we thank you, Amrita, for your so vociferous participation in this session. Right. So with this, we don't have any more question in the chat box. And with this, we would come to the end of this lecture. Thank you, Dr. Bashir, for accepting our invitation. And firstly, let me share a brief anecdote. I never met Dr. Bashir personally. We did our our FDP program at Jamia Millia Islamia together, and then I got to know her, and then I immediately thought about inviting her to our college, and we are glad that she readily responded to our invitation. The lecture got delayed due to this pandemic, third wave, and so on, but eventually it happened. We are really very grateful to you, ma'am. We have also uh, a number of people to thank about this event. This event wouldn't have been possible without the support of our principal, Madam Dr. Otoshi Karfa. It has been her encouragement because of which we are conducting this year-long lecture series, an evening with an expert. It wouldn't have been possible without the support, technical support from our web developer Akash Mondol. I would also like to thank our colleagues, Professor Durba Mukherjee, Professor Sneha Pan, Professor Rajkumar Bormon, Professor Shudipta Mondol, Professor Shinjini Ghosh, and others for making it a success. So, with this, I would like to thank everyone who has listened to this lecture and who has offered the comments, suggestions in the chat box. We have tried to take your comments as much as possible, and we would like to meet you again, preferably in the offline mode when things are better. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for joining.
And
With this, we
thank you, Dr. Shubham. That it was completely my pleasure, and I'm actually honored, really honored for that you guys invited me. Thank you
yes,
so much, and please extend my grateful thanks to everyone in the department. Thank you.
absolutely, absolutely, ma'am. We are honored that you have
No, no,
made your
the
time
pleasure is
to
all mine.
deliver this
Thank you.
lecture.
Okay,
Okay,
bye bye.
okay. Thank you.
Bye. Stay safe.
Thank you.